Welcome to beginning ASP.NET programming in C#. The following are going to be our objectives. Number 1, getting started building an ASP.NET application. Number 2, understanding the building blocks of ASP.NET. 3, looking at the code files, understand view state and postbacks. And number 4, how to debug an application in ASP.NET. So let's get started. Let us look at how to develop a simple ASP.NET application using Visual Web Developer 2010 Express. Let me bring up Visual Studio Web Developer from my start menu. Okay, so once I'm at Visual Web Developer 2010 Express, I go to the File menu and I say File, New Website. So this prompts me to create what kind of website for me, either an empty website or a website with some predefined templates. I go for the first one, an ASP.NET website which has some predefined templates, and I click OK. Remember, this website is a set of files, and these files are created at this location given below. So you can choose a different location where you want the files to be created. For now, I would let the default be as is, and here I am at this main menu, selecting the default ASP.NET website and then choosing the default locations where the files will be created in the file system, and I say OK. So what happens is Visual Studio by default creates a set of files for me. Okay, and there is one main file called default.aspx. Remember, ASP.NET presentation code files have the extension as ASPX. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll just run this application. I'm just going to click on this green button and say start debugging. Okay, so what happens? You can look at the output here. It shows building the directory, building the application. Okay, and then there is a prompt for you whether you want to enable debugging, yes or no. Okay, since we are in development mode, let us enable debugging. So choose the default, which is modify the web.config to enable debugging, and say OK. So this will load up my default web browser, which happens to be Firefox by the way, and it loads the website here. My website had the name as website 9. Okay, yours would have the name as website 1 if you're running it for the very first time. Okay. So what happened behind the scenes is Visual Web Developer built you a template to start coding. So you have a basic template for a web application ready for you. You have you have a title bar, and then you have two menu items: the home, which loads the default.aspx, and then the about. Okay, if you look here at the status bar here, you would see that when I click home, it points to default.aspx, and when I click on about, it shows me the file about.aspx. Okay, then there is also a login component, a security component also already built in. Okay, don't worry about how each one of them works for now. We will look at them as we go along in greater detail. The most important thing for you to understand is now you have a template for you to start building web applications. Okay, so I go back to Visual Web Developer, and then I can end this program by clicking on this button. Okay, so what happens now is I'm going to look at the files. What is the structure of the ASP.NET application. First and the foremost is the web.config. The web.config defines the configuration data for the application. Okay. Take a moment to open your web.config and look at the entries in this file. You have all the configuration data defined in this single file. You have the connection strings, which will tell you which databases to use, the locations and their security schemes. Okay, and then if you're using authentication, what mode of authentication and what are the rules, everything, every configuration element for the web application is defined in web.config. And now let's go and look at default.aspx. Here you can see that there is a line called welcome to ASP.NET. Okay. You can change this to whatever you want. Let's change it to some text. Okay. And then can remove this one. Okay. To my very first web application. Okay. And everything inside the ASPX page is a markup, is a HTML markup. Okay, you will find specialized markups like which begin with ASP dot. Okay, don't worry about that. We look at them in just a few moments, right? Otherwise, you can still use all the HTML tags. We have a H2 tag and then a paragraph tag. You can have bold items here. Okay, so Visual Web Developer is also a full-fledged HTML editor. Okay, so once you made some small changes, let's run this application to see how it looks. Okay, so the change text has come in here. Okay, you can see that we made first as bold. So, and that is how it appears on the web page now on the browser. Okay. So going back to Visual Web Developer, we looked at web.config. Web.config defines all the configuration elements for the web application. Okay, and it is an XML file. Okay, then we looked at default.aspx. ASPX files contain a markup for the web application. They define the presentation, how the data is presented to the user. ASPX files contain a mixture of HTML and ASP.NET tags. The ones we look here, ASP:content, these are all ASP.NET tags. And then let us look at a very important component of the Visual Web Developer called the toolbox. On your left here you see the toolbox. Okay, this toolbox will help you create different controls on a page. For example, let us say you wanted to create a label. Okay, so let me open the toolbox and search for this label. It is here. Click on this label, drag and drop it to the page. The markup is copied from me. Okay, so I will change the label, the ID to something called LBL name, because I use a coding convention which says all controls have the IDs. The prefix denotes the type of the control. For a label I will use LBL. For a text I will use TXT, for example. Okay, and then the text would be name. Okay, Don't worry about what run server means. We will see in just a few minutes. Okay. Now, let us go back and add one more text box. And where is text box? Yep. Select text box, drag and drop it on your ASPX page. Okay, there you have a text box now. Change the ID to txt name. Okay, then we got to save this one, and when we run this application, you can see that the true controls, the label and the text box are available now. Okay, now let us go back to the application again. Okay. And so this is the markup file. For every markup file, ASPX file, there is an associated code file. That code file has the same name as the ASPX file, but it has the extension called .cs. For example, ASPX file, if you look at the Solution Explorer, under ASPX file you have the ASPX.cs file. Each ASPX file will have a corresponding .cs file. So let's open this file. Okay, so this file contains a different event handling code for the web application. Okay, so ASP.NET follows an event-based model. It is based on an event-based architecture. An event represents something that has happened, and that event is mostly a user clicking on something on the web application. And when an event happens, a method that responds to the event is called, and that event is an event handler. Okay, so we have events which are generated by the user, and we have handlers, which are actual code which we write using C# that will respond to that event. So events have handlers, and event handlers are always written in the ASPX.cs file. All ASP.NET event handlers take two parameters and return a void. Okay. The first parameter represents the object which is raising the event, and the second parameter represents information which is specific to the event. Okay, so for example, on page load, what needs to happen on page load is defined by the event handler given by protected void page load, and the parameters are the sender and the event arguments. Okay, in this case the page load happens through ASP.NET. The sender is ASP.NET, and it has a set of event arguments. Okay, so event arguments, what are event arguments? Event arguments are data which is associated with the event. For example, let's say a user clicks on a list box. Okay, and in a list box we have items, and items have a selected index. The event args will have a property which tells us which particular item was selected. Okay. So when it is a list box which sends that event, the event args contain values which denote the selected item. Similarly, if it is a text box, for example, we would have events which tell us more about the data in the text box. Okay, for example, let's say there's a text change event. We would know who the sender is if it's a text box, and if it's a text box, what are the events that happen on the text box. For example, which data was changed, and so on. Okay, so as we go along learning ASP.NET, we would learn more and more about the different events and the event args. Okay, so for now, very important thing to remember is ASP.NET follows an event-based model. ASP.NET reacts to events that are generated by the user. Okay, so let us go back to our application. So on page load, we have a simple event handler which is empty. Okay, so let's close this one in this application, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the tool. I'm going to go to default.aspx first, and then using the toolbox I'm going to create a button. I select the button, drag and drop it on the file. Okay, and then I'll call this button as btn click, some name. Okay, the text is button. Remember, I have given this as run@ equal to server, so I save this file. Now on this button has a text called button. Okay, on the now let's go to the event handler. On page load, I want to change the text of the button to something else, so I will call it btn click. Okay, dot text is equal to click me. Okay, so I want to save this. Okay, and then when I run this application, I will have something called click me. Okay, so let's go back to the application to see what we did. So on the page load event, I changed the text value of the button to something called click me, to a value called click me. The most important point to remember is I was able to reference the control on the code page. Why? How is it possible? Because I specified the button as run@ equal to server. When you say control is equal to run@ equal to server, it means that ID is accessible on the web application, on the server. Remember, this code default.aspx.cs, whatever is there in the default, whatever is there in the default.aspx.cs executes on the server. Okay, you have a browser which submits to the server. Okay, the browser is your client, and what get executes on the server is the server code, right? So all event handling happens on the server side. So what happens once the event handling is done? ASP.NET sends back HTML to the browser. Remember, your browser, whether it is Firefox or Chrome or Internet Explorer or whatever it is, understands only HTML. Okay, so when you request this page default.aspx, right, what the server does is it reads your request, and then using this markup you have defined here in this file, it generates HTML. Okay, before generating the HTML, it executes the different event handlers and it returns back plain HTML to the browser. Remember, please always remember, your browser can understand only HTML. The web server, your web application, reads the request, in this case default.aspx, this whole path, and then it returns back HTML to you, to your browser. Okay, and before returning back HTML, it does some event handling, and one of the event handling is page load, which has changed the name of the property of button to the default value of button to click me. So I hope you understand what event handling is all about. Okay, so whenever I do something on this web application, I am a client, This is the client window which you're seeing now. This data is transferred to the server, and on the server some event handling happens based on whatever I did here, whether I click this button or entered some text or I did some other user action or any other action. Any action I do on this page is called a user action because it is done by the user. This user action goes to the server and the corresponding event is executed, and then plain HTML is returned by the web application to your browser. That is all what ASP.NET web application is all about. It reads your request, HTML request, does a few things and returns you back HTML. All web browsers work on the same principle. Remember, your browser, whatever it is, Chrome or Firefox or whatever, it understands only HTML. And the data transfer between your browser to the web server happens using HTTP. Your browser understands HTML and it talks to the server using HTTP. The server reads the request using HTTP, does some processing and returns back a response which is HTML using HTTP. Okay, so very simple. There are only two protocols used in this whole scheme of things. Number one is HTML, which you would already be knowing about what it is, which is plain markup. Number two is HTTP, which is the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. So what ASP.NET or any other web application framework does is it makes the usage of HTTP very transparent to the user. You need not understand how the whole protocol works. We are application programmers. We focus on problem solving. Okay, so when this request comes in, we perform some event handling and return back a response. In a nutshell, that is all what a web application is. A web application is a very, very simple thing. It takes user input in HTML form, sends it to the server using HTTP, gets back a response, same using HTTP, and the response contains HTML, which displays back to the user. That is all about what a web application is all about. Okay. The dynamism, the controls, the usability, the flexibility, and the problem solving capacity, all that is what make your web application unique. And ASP.NET has a set of tools for you. It has everything that you want to build great web applications. Okay, and our aim in learning ASP.NET is to understand how to build great applications using the controls which ASP.NET provides for us. Okay, for this we need to understand the architecture, the components, the building blocks, and how everything are all organized together in ASP.NET. That is all what our learning is going to be. Okay, so let us go back to the event-based model. Let me also show you about the button. Okay, so we had this button, we added this new button, right? And if you look here, you have three different tabs here. Let me click on the design tab, and here is the button, right? And on this button, I see ASP.NET also gives you a template to tell you how your application will look like. Okay, so let's click on I double click on this button. It puts a default template for me for the event handling. Okay, and it also has changed and added extra parameter called onClick. Okay, so there is an extra parameter or attribute on the ASP button tag, which gives me the name of the event handler. and here's my event handler. So let me do something here in the event handler. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the text user entered, text string caption is equal to txt name dot text. What are the user entered here? I'm going to take it, and then I'm going to change the buttons text to what the user entered. Okay. So let me save this and run the application one more time. So let me enter something in the name field. I would enter something called, let me say hello. Hello. Did you notice that the caption of the button changed to hello? That was because of the event handling. So whenever the button was clicked, this particular event handler btn click was called. Okay, and btn click underscore click has the code which gets the texts what the user entered and sets it as the caption for the button. Okay, so that is all about event handling. Okay, we will be looking at different types of event handling as they go along. Okay. So let us continue with something very, very interesting called a view state. So we know that recalling it from what we learned in C#, an object has state, right? And the state of an object is the value of its attributes. Different objects have different states. Okay. Now, what is the state of the web application? You know, let's say there is a web application. Whatever, it could be your favorite search engine, or let us take yahoo.com for a discussion. Okay, and suppose you are using your browser and accessing yahoo.com, and I am sitting here at my desk and using my favorite browser. I am also accessing yahoo.com. Okay, so yahoo.com has one application which is serving both of us. Okay, and the state of the web application for yahoo.com would be whatever values you are entered in the search box or whatever you have done on the particular page, and for me, my state is what are the values I have entered, the search text I have entered, or the selections I have done, or the preferences I have made. Okay, so your state and my state are different for the same web application. Okay, so a web application would have hundreds of states for each of the concurrent users. Okay, a state represents the value of the controls, okay, that are available in that particular user session. You have a session with yahoo.com, I have a session with yahoo.com. Similarly, hundreds and thousands of people have such similar sessions. Each of us have unique state. Your state may be same as my state. I mean, you could have entered the same text which I am searching for. That's fine. Still, you have a state and I have a different state. Okay. So, with many simultaneous users accessing the same web page, there are many states for the web applications per page and per user. Okay. So, one important point to remember is when the browser talks to the server using HTTP, HTTP by nature is a stateless protocol, meaning HTTP makes a request, gets a response, and it is done. Okay, when you make a new HTTP request, what was the earlier request there is no knowledge of the earlier request. HTTP does not know what was the previous state. So that is why we say HTTP is a stateless protocol. So for example, if I have my first search, I am searching for houses in India, and then my second search, I enter the name as Salem. Now, there is a city called Salem in India as well as in the United States. Since HTTP is a stateless protocol, it cannot make the connection that I first searched India and then I searched for a city called Salem. So, for it, the second search, Salem, is a new, it's a completely new search. There is no way it can tie the context together. So there is no state remembrance in HTTP, in plain HTTP. So what web servers do is, they have workarounds which help us to remember the state. And one such state keeping mechanism is view state. So view state is a way of maintaining user state in between different invocations to the same web application by the same user. So I hope you got this right. So view state is a mechanism to maintain the states for different users accessing the same page on the same web application. Okay. So what is view state? Whenever the client requests a page from the server, for example, you said, I want default.aspx. What ASP.NET does is, it looks at all the controls defined in the markup for ASPX file and then the default values, and it builds a name value pair. The name value pair is then serialized into a base64 encoded string. Okay, and then the server returns the HTML to the browser with this base64 encoded string as a hidden field. For example, the HTML which comes to the browser would have this format. There will be HTML/HTML, and in the form there would be a hidden field, input type equal to hidden. The name is underscore view state, okay, and the value is a base64 encoded string. This string is the name value pair which the server generated using the controls that are defined in the ASP.x page. For example, let's say we are looking at default.aspx. Okay, in default.aspx we have controls, a label, text box, and a button. Okay, and these label, text box, and button have some values. For example, button has the text called button, which is changed at page load. So what happens is, when this button with the text is changed to click me, for example, very first time, what happens is, this value, the server builds a dictionary, a name value pair. It says LBL name and then the value is name, txt name, and it is empty very first time, and button click, right, button click, and the caption is, and the text is button. Okay, which is then changed at the page load to click me. Okay, so this is the state of the button. The button is a state, the text is called click me, right? So these values are put into a dictionary and then written, converted into a string. There is a complex algorithm on how ASP.NET does it, which is we need not worry about how it does it. Okay, all we need to worry is it gives us a base64 encoded string which can tell the server what was the state of the controls. Now, so let's say you make some changes to the page and then you send it back to the server. What the server will do is, since it is a stateless protocol, the server knows nothing about what was your previous request. Number one, right? The server sent you the page. You requested default.aspx. The server sent you the page. Now you entered some values in the text box and then clicked on the button. Now this page, this event goes to the server. The server does not know what was your original value. Okay. So what it does, because it is a stateless protocol, HTTP is a stateless protocol, the server does not know anything about what happened previously. So how does it make the link? What it does is, first and foremost, number one, it recreates the page based on default values. It looks at default.aspx and it builds the default values. Second, what it does is, the base64 encoded string, which was a hidden field which is also sent to the server, is deserialized, and now when it is deserialized, it gets back a name value pair. In that name value pair, it knows which control had which state, so it pre-populates them to that state which it was before sending it to the client. Now number three, it looks at the client posted data. Okay, so whatever data user entered is then looked at, and then accordingly for that user entered data, if there is event, that event is handled. Now after the event handling happens, there will be new values for the controls. So these are the values which are going to come back to the client now. Before coming to the client, the values of the controls are again once more base64 encoded and sent along with the request, so that the next time we make a request, the previous values go back to the server in this base64 encoded string. So let's see how it happens, right? Let me close all the browser windows here. Okay, let me close Firefox. Okay, and just let me run this application. So when I run this application, I'm going to request for default.aspx. Okay, right? So when you do a request for default.aspx, what the server does is gives me HTML. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click here and look at page source. Okay, so we have HTML, okay, and then head title tags, and then there is a form tag here. Inside the form tag there is a input type equal to hidden, a hidden value, a hidden variable, hidden HTML control. The name is __ view state. Okay, and the value is a base64 encoded string. It's a big string. So what will happen is, when I make some changes on this page, when I make some changes on this page and submit it to the server, using the values, using this value, the server will recreate the controls to the state which was there before it was sent to the browser. Okay, and then it look at the data which the user entered using the text name.text, so those properties. It will invoke the event handling, make some changes to the data if required, and then before returning a new state to of the controls, it will once again form another base64 encoded string and send it along with the request. So what happens is, each time when the request and response happens between the server and the browser client, the base64 encoded string, the view state, is transferred up and down. So the view state contains the state of the controls just previous to what the user did. Okay, so this is how context is maintained on the server for the same user between invocations. don't this is a very simple thing to follow actually, which will get clear as we go along, right? What I would recommend you is to understand, read through this one more time and understand, try to understand what view state is. Okay, it'll don't worry if it is sounding vague for now, it will get clear as we go along. Okay. So what does view state do? View state enables effective resource utilization on the server. The control information and the state comes in each request from the client, so the server does not need to remember the state for the user. Remember, there is a web server, for example yahoo.com again, serving hundreds and thousands of users. If that web server were to remember each user session on the server, session management or the understanding what each user requested would be a complex task for itself, and involving lots of memory, lots of process, right? Instead, if each client used to send what it asked previously, the server need not worry about keeping the state, because it knows when the client connects to it, it will tell me what its original state, previous state was. That is what view state is all about. View state is the current state of the controls returned to the clients. Okay, so view state is a very beautiful solution done by ASP.NET to solve the problem of resource utilization on the server. View state enables effective resource utilization on the server. The server does not have to worry about maintaining state for hundreds and thousands of users, right? Because it knows that each control information comes in each request from the client. This technique alone allows ASP.NET Web Servers to scale to hundreds and thousands of concurrent requests. Using this technique, your web application, if you use it correctly, can serve hundreds and thousands of users effectively without a problem. Okay. So what is view state? View state is a technique of maintaining state on the server. So HTTP is a status protocol. When you make a new request, what was the previous request we do not know. So for this, what the server does is, when it sends the HTML to the client browser, it puts the previous state in a hidden variable and sends it along. So next time you post something, this hidden variable also goes to the server, which the server uses that value to recreate the original state and compare and process your new state. So that is how, that in a nutshell, that is how all about view states. Another important concept we need to understand before we go further is postback. A postback allows us to process a client action immediately on the server. An example of postback actions are a user clicking on some checkbox or radio buttons, or making selection from a list. So when do you want the client browser to connect to the server? In a typical web application, whenever there is a checkbox or a radio button, we make some selections based on the radio button, right? The page has to change. Okay. For example, let's say you're filling up a form, a questionnaire, okay, and depending on the age of the person, or depending on the occupation, right, you have a different set of questions. For college students, you have a set of questions. For employed people, you have a set of questions. For senior citizens, you have a set of questions. So let's say you have 3 checkboxes: college students, professionals, and senior citizens. 3 radio buttons, and as you click each radio button, the contents should change, the questions should change. So this is an example of a postback. Okay. So how do we do postback? We enable postback by adding an attribute in the ASP tag called auto postback. So here in this example we have a list box, okay, and the list box is run equal to server and auto post back equal to true. So what happens is, whenever the list box items are changed, it is automatically posted back to the server. So how does post back happens? Very transparent to the user. When an ASP page is requested from the client and delivered to the browser, remember the server adds the view state. Similarly, it also adds a JavaScript function called doPostBack, okay, and it adds two hidden input fields. So this JavaScript function will automatically post the changes to the server. Okay, so in a nutshell, postback happens transparent to the user. Okay, let's look at an example to understand postbacks. I'll close this project and let me open an existing project which you can download from the website. I click File, Open Website. Okay, so on my default.aspx I have a list box. Okay, I call it list payment type and run equal to server and auto post back equal to true. Okay, and then I have a panel which has credit card details. Okay, and inside this panel is just a placeholder for different label and text elements. Okay, I have a label and I can have text. Let's say I want to collect credit card information. I want this panel to be enabled only when the user selects credit card from the list box. Okay, so let's see how to do it. Remember, it is an event-based programming model. Okay, so on the page load, I first check if the page is a postback using the isPostback property. So if it is not postback, if it's a normal page load, okay, what I do is I create 3 list items. First is advice to the user, select a payment option and has 2 values, cash and credit card. Okay, then I add them to the list box, which is called list payment type, this list box, right? And then that's it, right? So let's run this and see. Okay, so we have a list box and this list box has 2 items, cash and credit card. Okay, now let's go back here and suppose if the page is a postback if it's a postback, we get the selected index from the list box and the selected index is equal to 2, which is credit card. I want to show the credit card panel, otherwise we don't want the credit card panel to show. So what we can also do is here, let me stop this application for now, and then if it's not a postback, by default let's make it visible equal to false. So when I run this application, okay, I click on cash, nothing happens. When I click on credit card, the credit card panel shows up. I click on cash, select cash again, it goes away. I click on credit card, it comes in. So each time I make a selection, what happens is a postback happens on the server, and on this postback some event happens. Okay, so postbacks are useful for items where you select something like a list box, drop downs, check boxes and radio buttons. Okay, so let's go back to our application. Before that, I want you to look at the page source. Okay, this is the HTML which the server returned to your browser. Okay, you can click look at the view page source, and then you can find that here is the view state. Okay, the view state is the view value of the controls that was returned by you to the server, so that you can send it back again to the server, and the server will know what was your previous state. Okay, and it also adds some other hidden input HTML elements, and then there is also a JavaScript function, right? So what we're trying to show you here is behind the scenes ASP.NET works for you. When you just say automatic postback equal to true, it works behind the scenes, generates the respective JavaScript, the hidden HTML elements, and it takes care of a lot of things for you to make your life easy. Okay, so we need not worry about this. We need not learn what is happening here. That is the beauty of the abstraction which the ASP.NET framework gives you. So ASP.NET framework is really a great tool to build web applications. Okay, let's continue. So don't worry about if you can't understand this JavaScript. It is not necessary. We are not. There's no mandate to understand this code. The important thing to remember is the ASP.NET framework works for you and helps you do a lot of things, makes life easy for us, so that we focus on solving the problem. Okay, so this was the example which you saw earlier. Okay, let us see how to debug a ASP.NET web application. So I will stop this application. Okay, and then let's say I want to debug this application, right? So I would use the mouse, and this is the page load, and on the post back I want to look at the selected index, so I'll click here. Okay, click on the left, okay, until you see this red dot. The red dot is a breakpoint. Okay, and then when you say start debugging, it starts working, right? And when you click on a particular item in the list box, okay, it takes you to the Visual Web Developer. Okay, and there it's stopping at this point here, right? And if you want to continue, you can use F10 to step over the code, or F11 to step into the code. Let's say this is a method. This is a method which you wrote. If you want to skip that method, use F10. I mean, go over the method. If you want to go inside the method, use F11. So let's use this. Just continue. I just use F10 to skip over, right? And what is selected index value? If I click here, you'll know it is 1. 1 is selected. So if selected index is equal to 1, means the credit card panel is false, right? So it goes to the else part, and this false. So this is how we debug a ASP.NET application. Okay, so this particular template which we have has a master page and it has a master's template. It is a master template, right? So more on that coming later. Okay, and what I would also encourage you is to go to this web application and click on the login link, register yourself, right? Okay, first you need to register yourself, username, password, confirm password. You create a user, okay, and then you can log in using that user. Okay, so and the security aspects are already defined for you in this template, we'll spend a whole session on looking at security. But for now, just play around so that to get a feel of how a web application, especially ASP.NET Web application, looks like. Okay. Okay. I think we have come to the end of the session now. Here's a summary of what we have seen so far. We have seen how to get started with a simple ASP.NET application using Visual Web Developer 2010 Express. We understood the structure of an ASP.NET application. We understood view state and postbacks, and we also saw how to debug an ASP.NET application. I hope you enjoyed this session. ASP.NET is a great framework and a great tool and a pleasure to work with. I hope you enjoyed these lessons and you'll find them as interesting as the lessons that are to come. Goodbye for now, and we'll talk to you soon.